Hi, Nick Pope. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Some of our listeners might not know who you are. Could you give us a kind of brief biography of what it is you do, how you got involved in ufology and...
Sure. I used to work for the Ministry of Defence, and I joined in 1985 and only left in 2006. So I had a 21-year career there. And for 3 years there, one of my various jobs, they move you around from post to post, one of my jobs was actually to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon. Now, that's something I did for the British government. So it was my official job at the MOD from 91 through to 94. And after that, I felt it was such an interesting and important subject that I felt I couldn't turn my back on it. So I've continued my research and investigation in a private capacity.
All right. From what I've read in interviews, I think the department you worked in had quite a funny name from in the MOD. Was it?
It's changed its name over the years. When I joined, it was called Secretariat Air Staff.
Oh, right.
It's now retitled itself. I mean, of course, the MOD, like all government departments, is constantly reinventing itself and having bureaucratic overhauls and things. It's now called Directorate Air Staff.
Oh,
so
right, okay.
DAS.
So when you joined the department, I guess you were just assigned it then.
Yes, I really had no prior interest in UFOs, no particular knowledge, no belief. To me, this was just another, albeit a very unusual one, but to me it really was just another posting. Part of the cycle of civil service postings, you would expect to move either on level transfer or on promotion every 2, 3, 4 years, something like that. And in fact, I was working in a different part of what was then called Secretariat Air Staff. And then I was seconded during the first Gulf War into the Joint Operations Center, doing a watchkeeping job. So we would do sort of 12-hour shifts. And whilst there, I was working for someone who I established a pretty good working relationship with. He, I think, came to see that I was a safe pair of hands. I could always be relied on to do short notice night shifts if there were any to be done, that sort of thing. So he said, look, I know that you're looking for a move. After the Gulf War, why don't you, instead of moving to another division, transfer from one part over to his section? And so effectively I was headhunted into the UFO job, but like I say, no prior knowledge or belief.
Yeah. So you say you're a skeptic. Would you say you're still a skeptic now?
I guess I was probably, I suppose in strictness, I was more of an agnostic than a skeptic. I really didn't know enough about the phenomenon to take a view, but I certainly didn't join with any belief in little green men.
And would you say that that's changed now since you've been researching the subject?
It has changed. My belief has, I think, evolved, and although I'm not going to sort of stand up and say, yes, I am absolutely certain that we're being visited by extraterrestrials, I certainly can't rule that out, and I certainly now view the UFO phenomenon in a very different way to when I first started. I think when I first started, I thought it was all going to be aircraft lights, weather balloons, and the odd nutcase. But now, whatever the UFO phenomenon is, I'm certainly convinced that there are some serious defense, national security, and flight safety issues. And I say that on the basis of A, having had access to the archive of files, and B, through having investigated the 200 or 300 cases a year that came my way during my tour of duty.
Yeah. So, what? It's a bit of an odd question, but what would an average week be like for you working at the in the MOD UFO group?
Well, I think it's probably easier if I sort of take an average day. And
okay.
but having said that, it really was a case that no 2 days were the same, and that's indeed one of the attractions of the job. You never quite knew what was going to happen next. But I think what a typical day would entail is getting in at say 9 o'clock and then checking the signals. We used to get UFO information. We had a reporting system whereby if anyone reported a UFO to a police station, to a military base, or to a civil airport, and those typically are the sorts of places that people do contact, there was a standard operating procedure whereby the material, the information would be taken down and then it would be sent on to the MOD, sometimes in the post, sometimes with military signals being sent. So the first thing was just to check the signals to see if there had been any sightings reported overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, I'll come on to the investigative methodology perhaps a little later, but just to give you a typical day. Then the first post will arrive, and the post might contain, again, more UFO sighting reports, or it might typically contain letters from, say, school children doing projects about UFOs, from people demanding to know what the MOD knows or thinks, that sort of thing. So I would get a mixture of sighting reports and correspondence. Then I might get a phone call from the press office to say that there was a media inquiry, and again, did we have a line that we could give the press on a particular story? Then there might be some meetings. Typically, I would work very closely with various Air Force specialists on this issue, radar specialists, for example, also colleagues in the Defence Intelligence staff. So there might be meetings where we would sort of look at our policy to see if we thought we were going in the right direction, to brainstorm any interesting cases we had. So yeah, it's a whole mixture of things, and indeed sometimes you would get phone calls if somebody phoned the MOD and asked to have a number to report sightings. They would be put through. So I might end up speaking to someone who'd had a sighting. It could be a member of the public. It could, as it was from time to time, be a police officer, someone in the military, or a commercial airline pilot. So it's a whole mixture of different things. That's what made the job quite interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Oh, you brought it up earlier, actually. The next question I was going to ask you was about the methodology you used to actually investigate the cases. But if you could talk to us a little bit about that, maybe.
Sure. The basic investigative methodology was something like this. We knew historically the sorts of things that people misidentify as UFOs.
Yeah.
And we knew that both from previous MOD experience and indeed from the experience of the United States Air Force when they had a similar project to ours, codenamed Project Blue Book.
Yeah.
And because we knew statistically that most UFOs turned out to be misidentifications, what we could do is basically get a list of all the things that people do misidentify and then check for them. So, for example, the first thing to do would be to look at the date and location of the sighting, and go to the big map of the UK with all the commercial flight paths listed, with all the military airfields on there, and things like that, and then cross-check that with something called NOTAMs, Notices to Airmen. This was a system whereby any unusual aerial activity, be it a sort of military exercise at night, dropping flares, say, or anything, sort of hot air balloon festival, a microlight competition, anything slightly unusual, out of the ordinary, would be in the NOTAMs, because of course you have to notify both civil and military aircraft operators of anything like that. So we would cross-check with the map, check with the NOTAMs, then we'd look at astronomical data. Again, I mean, if you're talking nighttime sightings, we would have access to astronomical data about particularly bright stars and planets, any meteors, fireballs, things like that. Then we could check satellite activity, both routine satellites and indeed something slightly out of the ordinary, like re-entries into the Earth's atmosphere of space debris, that sort of thing. Meteor showers, fireballs, etc. Then, of course, comes radar. Air Force specialists could help us with that. So a routine question would be, was anything tracked on the radar? We could get the tapes looked at, we could get them sent to us. If there was a photo or a video, again, there were technical specialists, imagery people who could analyze and enhance the footage. So it's a series of, it's not quite like the X-Files, running around with guns and torches and things. It's much more checking against known aerial activity, and indeed just using a bit of common sense. And sure enough, in most cases, after you've gone through that process, you can, with a fairly high degree of certainty, tie up the UFO sightings with something that you're able to position in terms of location and date. And it might be aircraft lights, weather balloons, meteors, bright stars and planets, airships, lasers and searchlights reflecting off low cloud, all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did you so I guess you'd kind of remove a lot of these claims or sightings rather through this kind of process. How often would you actually find something that that you couldn't explain?
It was probably about 5% of the cases. 80% of the cases we could explain as misidentifications with fairly high degree of certainty. Another 15% of the cases were cases where we really didn't have enough information to make a firm assessment. Sometimes people, for example, would report significantly after a sighting and not even recall the exact date. And again, if somebody was reporting something more than about a month in the past, there would be no way of checking, for example, the radar data, because unless something unusual is picked up on radar at the time, normally the old data would only be kept for a month. So that was certainly the practice when I was doing the job. So yeah, 80% explained, 15% insufficient data, 5% unknown.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I mean, when we see the X-Files or these, or films about UFOs, whenever you sort of see the places that the UFOs always seem to appear, it's always like Hicks in America and in sort of strange places. What were the people like that you would that would report these claims to you?
Oh, anyone and everyone. I mean, it really was a mixture. There's a wonderful line in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind where I think they say something like ordinary people in extraordinary situations. I mean, it really is anyone and everyone. It ranges from school children, doctors, lawyers, factory workers, teachers, police officers, pilots. There's really no category of person that I can think of that hasn't had a UFO sighting of some sort.
Yeah. Were there any particularly kind of like recurring characters, people that would kind of turn up and keep reporting UFOs that you could just tell were...
We certainly had our regular correspondents. Sometimes they were people who I think were actively involved in the UFO community, so you could argue that they were predisposed to all this and had a belief and an expectation. And sometimes you got the impression with some of these people that every aircraft light was an alien scout ship, and every airship was a mothership. And add to that, we had regular characters who, I'll choose my words carefully, were certainly colourful characters. I suppose you could say they had an obsession with the subject, not necessarily any personal sighting, but an interest in it. They would phone up and give you their latest theories about the subject, or sometimes actually accuse us of being part of a cover-up. And
I was going to ask you about that later, actually.
Yes, I mean, so yeah, there were one or two people who, when you picked up the phone and they said, "Hello, it's Mr. X," I would inwardly groan and think, I'm going to be on the phone for another 10 or 15 minutes, and with some of these characters, you just have to try and find an excuse to get them off the line at the end of things.
One thing, I mean, again, going back to the X-Files, in the series, the department that Mulder works for is often, it's like shoved down in the basement, and people tend to kind of mock it. Was that similar with your department? Was it seen as a bit of an odd area to work in, or within?
Well, yes, it very much was regarded as the quirky kind of post, and indeed, I was doing that job at just around the time when the X-Files was becoming popular, and the parallels were made. I mean, people did literally say, "Oh, you work in the X-Files department, don't you?" And people did actually call me Spooky, the same nickname as Fox Mulder, and occasionally I would walk down the corridor and I would hear people whistling the theme tune. So it did have a little bit of a quirky reputation. But having said that, of course, it was something that fascinated people as well.
Yeah.
People would come up to me in the canteen and say, "Come on, any interesting new sightings? What's really going on?" So it was a whole mixture of different reactions. As for being in the basement, though, it couldn't have been further from the truth. For some reason, we were up on the 8th floor, which is about as high as it gets.
Oh, right. Yeah, that is pretty high.
I had literally out of my office window, I had a great view of 10 Downing Street.
Ah, that's pretty good.
Also related to the X-Files, it seems that the American cases are much more colorful. They seem to have all sorts of abductions and cattle mutilations and little green men. Are the English cases much more serious than the Americans? What are the differences?
I think there are similarities and differences if you look at Britain as opposed to America. I mean, I think inevitably national characteristics come in, and I suppose you could talk about the British Reserve and things. So perhaps some of the more outlandish cases don't actually get reported at all because people are more afraid of ridicule and disbelief here. Whereas in America, it's such a multimedia society and everyone seems to have an opinion on everything that people are maybe more frank about speaking out. But having said that, we do have some quite interesting cases here in the UK. And although the MOD doesn't have many cases on its files, there are a number of abduction reports in the UK. I mean, I've probably looked into about 100 cases, most of it in a private capacity after I left that particular MOD post. But so we do, I think national characteristics, I suppose, have an impact on how people report things and how people interpret their own experiences, and belief obviously has a part to play. But there are similarities too. I mean, I can point to similarities in abduction cases in Britain and America, for example.
I was interested, actually. We're going to go to a break after I ask this question. Well, after you answer this question, and then we'll come back to some more of the famous cases you looked into. But why did you end up leaving the MOD?
I was promoted. I'd done 3 years. I'd gotten a series of fairly good reports. So I applied for and was successful in a promotion. 3 years was about average for a posting back in those days. And if I hadn't left on promotion, I was probably due for a level transfer anyway. Obviously, I was very pleased to have been promoted, but there was a part of me, of course, that was sorry to be leaving what was an absolutely fascinating job. And although I went on to do some other exciting things in my MOD career, there was nothing quite like that again. So that's one of the reasons why I carried on my research, but in a private capacity.
Yeah. Do you find it that not being a member of the MOD now hinders your research at all, or do you find that now you've got a bit more time to look into sort of specialised areas?
It swings and roundabouts. Obviously, when I was at the MOD, particularly, of course, when I was doing that job, I could quite literally pick up the phone and ask Air Force officers to check the radar tapes for a particular time and location, and it would be done. If I had a photo or video, like I say, I could send it off to specialists and get it analysed and enhanced. Now, effectively, I'm working just as none other member of the public might do. I've got no access to that specialist advice and expertise. I suppose because I've got a profile in the media, that gives me some advantages. And yes, and as you rightly suggested in your question, obviously now I no longer work for the government at all. I have a little bit more time to devote to this. And yes, I mean, the fact that I've got contacts on various national newspapers and with TV news programs and things gives me a little bit more clout when it comes to maybe getting something looked at if I want it done.
Okay. Well, we're going to go to a break now. We're going to play a couple of promos and for other podcasts and some music, and we'll be back after that. Right, so back to the interview. We asked Nick about the recent release of documents to the National Archives.
There was a dedicated website set up to host this, because the French government did this last year, and their website crashed under the weight of hits. There were so many people trying to log on. So they set up a special website, which was nationalarchives.gov/UFOs. It was a special part of the website. And within a couple of weeks, within two to 3 weeks of that release, there had been 1.7 million downloads of material. So it's absolutely immense interest in this subject.
Yeah. So I mean, what I guess these are the kind of reports you were dealing with when you worked for the MOD. I mean, how are these kind of documents laid out for someone that hasn't actually seen them?
They're in 8 separate files, and they're available on the website as PDF.
All right.
Now, most of the files that have been released in this first batch are simply sighting reports dating from, most of them, the early 80s. So most of the material in there is just 1 or 2 page summaries of what was seen. And of course, as we discussed earlier in the show, a lot of it, of course, is quite obviously fairly mundane. It's clear misidentifications of mainly aircraft lights, stars, planets, and meteors. But in amongst that mundane material, if you're prepared to wade through those 2,000 sheets of 2,000 separate pages or so, there are some more interesting sightings, including cases where the witnesses are police officers. There are a couple of cases where pilots report seeing UFOs, and there's one interesting case where 2 UFOs are tracked on a military radar, travelling 10 nautical miles in about 12 seconds. So it's some interesting papers in this first batch. What will be, I think, more interesting, and there are going to be further releases. This is going to take 4 years, and the reason it's going to take so long, by the way, is that somebody has to actually go through this manually and check that none of the information in there is information which should be withheld under any of the exemptions to the Freedom of Information Act. Yeah. Most popularly, of course, people's personal details, names and addresses of witnesses and other details have to be struck out, but also anything that would prejudice defence or national security. So, for example, if there were discussions in there about the capabilities of military radar systems, that's going to have to come out. So someone's got to go through these tens of thousands of pages, literally word by word, and then make sure that the material's blacked out. So this is why it's going to take possibly 4 years. And it's going to be a rolling program of disclosure. So we're going to see probably a half a dozen new files or so every month.
All right. So, I mean, I know you've written some books, and we'll talk about those later on, but I guess those are kind of directly influenced by your work at the MOD. So this must make it a little bit easier for you to talk about certain cases now if they've been brought out into the public and then less classified. I mean,
exactly, yes. I mean, of course, I've signed the Official Secrets Act, and that binds me for life, even though I've left. And of course, I take that very seriously, and I would never do anything to prejudice national security. Inevitably, what I've had to do, therefore, is confine myself to talking about cases that the MOD has already released under FOI, or speak generically. So yes, this program of release makes it much easier for me to discuss things which previously I couldn't have discussed. Of course, what I can't do is preempt the MOD on this. So I can't talk about what's going to be in the next batch because I don't know whether some parts of it might be redacted under the various exemptions. So there are still limits, of course, on what I can say. But yes, once all this material is released, it's going to be much easier. And of course, there'll be an audit trail of documents that when I talk about cases, I can just refer people directly to.
Yeah, that'd be a lot handier. Well, one thing you mentioned earlier on is when you said it was interesting when you get officials reporting these sightings. Well, I mean, one particular example I can think of that is the Rendlesham Forest case. I know that you've covered this before yourself in the media, but it's in many ways it's referred to as Britain's Roswell. Could you explain why that is and what actually happened well, as far as you know, what happened at Rendlesham?
Yes, this is Britain's most famous UFO case by a long way, and it's certainly, I think, the case that even the skeptics at the MOD regarded as the most significant and the most interesting. Essentially, over a series of nights in December 1980, a UFO was seen by military personnel based at 2 United States Air Force bases in Suffolk, Bentwaters and Woodbridge. On the first night, strange lights were seen in the forest, and a team went out thinking that maybe an aircraft had crashed. And they encountered a UFO, not in the sky, but actually this thing had landed in a clearing, and it was on 3 legs or some sort of tripod-like device. One of them got close enough to touch the side of this thing and sketch strange symbols on the hull, which looked a little bit like Egyptian hieroglyphs. The UFO then took off, and subsequently the landing site was examined with a Geiger counter, and the MOD's Defence Intelligence staff assessed the radiation readings taken as seeming significantly higher than background. On subsequent night, the UFO returned, and on this occasion, the witnesses included the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt. So all sorts of things happened in this case to make it significant. It was a multiple witness event. Most of the witnesses were military, and critically, of course, there was this physical evidence. I mean, afterwards at the landing site, there were these 3 indentations in the ground where this thing had come down, and that's exactly where the radiation levels peaked. And also there was some damage to some of the trees where branches had been snapped off as this thing had come through. So it's a hugely significant case.
Yeah, I mean the media. How did they respond to it when it first got reported?
It was literally front page news. Now, of course, this happened at the height of the Cold War. Tension was rising because of the situation in Poland with the trade union Solidarity. And of course, the default position of the MOD and the military was to say nothing. So there was no question of going public with this sighting. But obviously, people talked. There were so many military witnesses that somebody must have said something. And word had leaked out that something unusual had happened and something unusual had been seen. But it was 1983 when, under the US Freedom of Information Act, researchers actually got hold of the first page in the MOD's case file on this, which was the only thing they knew about, which was Colonel Holt's initial one-page report to the Ministry of Defence. But of course, this made it abundantly clear, this report, that this wasn't lights in the sky. This was a structured craft. This was a landing. Physical evidence in terms of the indentations and critically the radiation levels were recorded. And of course, once that document emerged under the Freedom of Information Act and got passed to the press, it was front-page news. The News of the World literally ran it as their front-page story: UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official.
Right, that's quite interesting.
There was, however, a BBC report that the whole case was a hoax, because there was a policeman who was a witness, then took the testimony back, then said it was a hoax. And also there seems to be some... there was some of the military men said that one of them, a sergeant, said that he touched the aircraft, and then there was someone else who said he didn't. And there seems to be quite a few contradictions in the case. Is this all true, or is it just a bad article from the BBC?
I think with a case like this, there are all sorts of apparent discrepancies that do creep in. I mean, I think that's where you've got a case that involves so many different witnesses. Inevitably, some of the descriptions will vary, and some people will disagree about, who saw what. Dealing with the skeptical theories, there's actually the initial skeptical theory put forward was that all these highly trained United States Air Force personnel had mistakenly sighted the lighthouse, the Orford Ness lighthouse, the beam of which was shining through the trees. Well, firstly, many of them had been posted there for months, if not years, and were familiar with the lighthouse. The other point is that Colonel Holt, during his encounter, actually said that he saw the lighthouse at the same time and used it to take a directional bearing on the UFO that he was seeing. So these, whatever it wasn't the lighthouse. And of course, the lighthouse theory doesn't account for any of the physical evidence, such as the indentations and the radiation readings. There was another report, yes, a couple of years ago, a security police officer came forward and said that he wondered whether he had inadvertently caused the whole incident by playing a practical joke on some of his colleagues involving letting all the lights on his police vehicle off and sort of driving into the forest. But again, that doesn't really add up. Firstly, some of the witnesses aren't even sure if this person was on duty that day anyway. But secondly, we're talking about a UFO that was seen on 2 different days, and again, of course, it doesn't explain the radiation levels taken at the landing site. So there are all sorts of theories doing the rounds, but even the MOD admit that this is the one case they couldn't really solve, and certainly I don't think police cars and lighthouses explain this.
No, especially radiation.
Do you have any?
Well, indeed, and that's of course an official assessment. You can read that. I mean, nobody has to take my word for any of this. I mean, the case file, including the Defence Intelligence Staff assessment of the radiation levels, the case file's been in the public domain for some years now under the Freedom of Information Act.
Do you have any theories as to why there's so many contradictory testimonies when there's a group of people sighting a UFO?
Well, I think one of the reasons may be that because this incident happened on at least 2 and maybe 3 nights of activity with UFOs, some people are literally describing different events. I mean, I think other things, other factors come into play as well. We're talking now about something that happened 27, 28 years ago, and when people now talk about it, say on TV documentaries and things, they're talking about something that happened half a lifetime ago, really.
Yeah.
So that to me, if everyone told exactly the same story 27 years on, I'd be a bit suspicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this also happened there was a documentary where there was a group of people which made an UFO. It was a gliding balloon or something like that, and they passed it over a gathering of people, and then they took the testimonies of every single one of the persons there, and almost all the testimonies were different as to the size of the UFO, the color, or the where the location and everything.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes, in fact, I think I was interviewed on that documentary, and certainly perception and belief play a part in interpreting experiences. But I think, any police officer will tell you that if you have say a car accident with 10 witnesses, they'll all tell a slightly different story, because they'll all be looking at it from slightly different angles. They'll all people are people. Memory is a funny thing, and you will get differences in descriptions when people are describing very real events. So to the skeptics that say that these discrepancies somehow invalidate the case, I'd say no. Just ask any police officer about witness testimony, and they'll tell you that people are individuals and they report what they see in a different way. And even something as immediate as a collision between two cars that happens, say, 10 yards away from you, different witnesses will describe it in different ways. I've seen that myself in another MOD job where I was looking at military aircraft accidents, and again it taught me a valuable lesson about witness testimony.
Yeah. I mean, there's a theory in journalism called framing theory, where if you take a look at one incident from different angles, you almost always get a different story or a different angle. It's quite common in psychology as well. This kind of people experiencing the same thing differently. It's it's one of those things that we can't really avoid, I think.
Yes, I think that illustrates the point perfectly, I think. And of course it doesn't just apply to Rendlesham Forest. It doesn't just apply to UFOs. It applies to life.
Yeah, definitely. One other case before, I was going to ask you after this actually about one of the cases you found most interesting, but one I found also interesting was I think it's called Berwyn Mountain. I was wondering if you know anything about it. It's in Wales, and apparently that's also called the Welsh Roswell.
Yes, the Berwyn Mountain case was interesting. I mean, it was January 1974, I believe, and some local people reported a loud explosion, and some other people reported strange lights in the sky. And initially, there was a search and rescue operation launched, because the fear was that maybe an aircraft had crashed. So the police and the local mountain rescue team actually went out and conducted a search. They didn't find anything, and it subsequently emerged that there had been a combination of events which had probably given rise to this. There was a small local earthquake in the area, and also it was believed there was some meteors and fireballs. Now, over the years, this is a tale, I think, that has evolved in the telling, and now if you speak to some UFO enthusiasts, they'll have you believe that an alien spacecraft crashed and was recovered by the military, who subsequently spirited it away to an Air Force hangar somewhere. Well, I've seen the file on this. Of course, it was way before my time, but there's no indication that this was anything other than a misidentification and a mistake with these different factors coming together.
Yeah. One thing I found interesting, because I only really kind of briefly looked at the case, was the reporting of these things called Men in Black. And I found, is this something you've encountered a lot in your research, or the appearance of these sort of shadowy figures that apparently emerge around UFO sightings?
Some UFO enthusiasts sort of suggest that so-called Men in Black, which is literally what it says on the tin, guys in dark suits, sometimes seen in the aftermath of a UFO incident, asking witnesses about what they've seen, and then maybe making threats or insisting that they don't talk to anyone. It's almost part of the mythology that's grown up around this. I have come across one or two cases where this has been reported, but I'm convinced that this again is a combination of maybe a number of different things. It could be that with some cases, it could be that it's say somebody from the Ministry of Defence, one of my predecessors, making a field visit and simply interviewing the witnesses, and whether they would have asked anyone not to talk about things, I'm not sure, but I can see that if I was visiting somebody, I'm sure I would have dressed smartly in a suit, and probably a dark one. So it could be that the Men in Black have their roots in officials legitimately investigating a UFO sighting. It may be that some of these reports, some of it's people, journalists or local UFO groups dressing up and smartly and going to see witnesses to try and get a story. And of course, I suppose if a journalist was on the case, they might ask that a witness doesn't speak to someone else so they can get the scoop.
Yeah.
The other thing that one does occasionally find is the sort of Walter Mitty type character who rather likes the idea of pretending to be a secret agent of some sort, and one sees in the press from time to time bogus police officers, bogus social workers, bogus paramedics. It wouldn't surprise me if there were one or two people out there who didn't get off on the idea of playing at being an MOD UFO investigator.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to say, we've talked about two kind of, I guess, more famous cases, but is there any case you could highlight to us that you found particularly interesting that may not have quite as got into the public consciousness as much as these two cases we've just discussed?
I think the case that stands out for me is the so-called Cosford incident. Now, this occurred in March 1993, so it was right in the middle of my tour of duty. And over a series of about 6 hours, starting at about 8:30 on the 30th of March and finishing up at about 2:45 the following morning, there was a series of sightings from many different parts of the UK. And we had about 60 witnesses in all, of whom some were police and some were military. And descriptions varied, but one of the descriptions that cropped up quite frequently was a large triangular-shaped UFO. Now, the highlight of this whole incident was the fact that the UFO flew over two military bases in the Midlands. It flew over RAF Cosford, where it was seen by a patrol of Air Force police officers, and then later it was seen by the meteorological officer at RAF Shawbury, and he described to me how this massive triangular-shaped craft, which he described as being midway in size between a C-130 Hercules and a Boeing 747. He said this was probably no more than 400 feet above the ground, emitting a low-frequency humming sound, and then firing a narrow beam of light down at the ground. And he said that suddenly, from moving very, very slowly, maybe no more than 30 or 40 miles an hour, he said suddenly this thing just accelerated away to the horizon. He said just in an instant. And when I asked him to try and compare the speed with, say, a military jet, he said, many, many times, maybe 10 times that quick. Speed and acceleration that he, even with 8 years' experience in the Air Force, had never seen or even conceived of.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
And, I mean, needless to say, we launched a full investigation. Even my sceptical head of division briefed the assistant chief of the air staff about this. And although we were able to tie in potentially some of the high altitude sightings with some re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere of space debris, that obviously didn't. That explained a cluster of sightings that occurred at about 10 past 1 in the morning, but it didn't explain all the other events, starting much earlier and finishing much later. And nor, of course, did it explain the sort of extraordinary triangular-shaped craft that witnesses, including the Met officer, had seen. And there was another bizarre little postscript to this story. Again, I was looking at the case file only the other day. It's been released under FOI for some years, and there's a wonderful little detail in there that's struck a chord with me. And after one of the early evening sightings, some people were going to the area where this had happened, and it was a field full of cows. And when they looked, all the cows were stood in a circle in the centre of the field, all facing each other. So now that really is like something out of the X-Files.
Yeah, that's really odd. Definitely. Oh, before we go, I was going to just ask you a couple of quite brief questions. But one was, what aspect overall of ufology do you think that interests you the most, that keeps you coming back to the subject and writing about it even after you've left the MOD?
I think what interests me is that concept that you've only got to have one of these events turn out to be extraterrestrial, and our entire world will change overnight.
Yeah.
So it's the possibility. Now, I don't say that I can prove that UFOs are extraterrestrial, but just that possibility makes the whole thing worthwhile. I think if we could prove that, and if we could get into a situation of, dare I say, without sounding too Star Trek-ish, but first contact, our world would be a very different day the day after that took place than it was the day before. And I think everything would change: our science, our religion, our psychology, our view of ourselves. Everything would change.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I was going to ask you as well quickly, I was reading through your website earlier on today, and you seem to have an interest in conspiracy theorists, and some of them seem to have dubbed you as a member of the Illuminati, or someone that's deliberately disinforming people. I mean, this was almost clearly going to happen with some conspiracy theorists because you're an ex-government worker, etc. Have you dealt with people like this before that have accused you of being part of a conspiracy? Or
Oh yes, when I was at the Ministry of Defence, people obviously thought that because I was on the UFO job, I was part of the cover-up. After I began to write and lecture about this subject, people accused me of being a disinformation agent. I don't think, with my government background, that I'm ever going to be able to shake off that image. I mean, if people want to believe that, nothing I can realistically say is going to persuade them to change their minds. But yes, I mean, obviously through that and through my interest in ufology, yes, I became interested in conspiracy theories more generally, be it ones relating to the moon landings, the death of Diana, or indeed 9/11. And in just about all cases, certainly from what I was able to find out, most of these theories are based on a combination of misunderstandings and misinterpretations, and just the will to believe that something was an inside job or a conspiracy theory, without any real hard evidence.
Yeah.
So because I've debunked quite a few conspiracy theories so publicly, even when I say positive things about UFOs, such as, look, we should be studying this seriously. I don't know what the UFO phenomenon is, but it's worth a look. Because I've been involved in debunking other conspiracy theories, I think that inclines people to believe that I've got some sort of debunking agenda on UFOs. But nothing could be further from the truth. I'd like to see more done on this subject. I'd like to see the government and the scientific community take it much more seriously.
One other thing I was going to say was, do you think that we've got another X-Files film coming out, haven't we, in July, I think it is. Do you think this is going to make the UFO subject more popular again? Because it was really popular in the 90s, the early 90s especially. It was huge with the X-Files coming out, and everyone is suddenly resurging this interest in UFOs. Do you think that the film might bring a heightened interest? I mean, has that interest, public kind of consciousness, sort of changed or waned in any way since the X-Files finished, or the popularity of the X-Files diminished?
Well, certainly in the 90s, the X-Files was hugely popular, and maybe that brought some people to the UFO subject. But ultimately, I think the UFO subject is events-led, and it's led by the sightings that continue to come in on literally a daily basis. I mean, I think certainly the new X-Files film will probably lead to some parallels being made with UFOs and the unexplained, and cover-ups and conspiracies. There's always a lot of interest in that. But the recent release of the first batch of the MOD's UFO files is an interesting example in itself, and the fact that that got 1.7 million downloads within 2 weeks illustrates that although something like the X-Files, the new movie, will, I'm sure, arouse some interest, that interest has never really gone away. It's always been there.
All right. Before we go, I was going to talk to you very quickly about your books, and about where people can find you on the web. I mean, what can we expect to find in a Nick Pope book? I know they're all slightly different, but
I've written 4 books. Open Skies, Closed Minds is about UFOs, and it's heavily based on my government work. The Uninvited is about the alien abduction mystery, and that's more based on private research than official work.
Yeah.
Then I've written 2 science fiction novels, Operation Thunderchild and Operation Lightning Strike, and they're essentially alien invasion stories, based on mixing what I know about UFOs with what I know about crisis management and war fighting within government and the military. So those are the books I've written, and details of that and all my various work strands can be found at my website, which is nickpope.net.
Okay, brilliant. Well, hopefully we'll get you on again at a later date to talk more in depth about some subjects. But thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate you giving us some time today. And thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks.